Tonight, let me tell you the story of Susanoo, the storm god of Japan, though perhaps not in the way you expect. When people first hear his name, they often think of tempests, of waves rising high, and of thunder rolling across the sky. Yet there is another side, one less told. This is a quieter story, one of exile, of listening, and of pines that whispered songs more powerful than any roar of wind. Long ago, Susanoo quarreled with his sister Amaterasu, the radiant goddess of the sun. Their arguments shook the heavens. The myths say that his temper was fierce, his behavior unruly, and so he was banished from the heavenly realm. To be cast out might sound like punishment, yet it is also the beginning of tonight's gentler tale. For, when he descended to earth, weary and wandering, he found himself at the edge of a forest where tall pines swayed in the evening wind. Their needles caught the air and made a sound unlike any clamor of battle, unlike any cry of anger. It was soft, steady, almost like the hush of waves retreating from shore. Susanoo sat beneath one tree and closed his eyes. For a moment, the storms within him quieted. The villagers who lived nearby remembered this moment in stories. They said that when he rested, the wild winds that had howled across the sea slowed into breezes. The fishermen could row their boats without fear. The mothers could rock their children to sleep, and even the dogs that barked at every thunderclap lay still by their doorways. In one telling, Susanoo wandered to a shrine near the coast. The building was small, its roof of cypress bark, its steps worn by many feet. A priest, seeing the stranger, offered a cup of water. Susanoo drank, and though his strength was that of a god, he bowed his head in thanks. The priest later told that the air around them grew calm, that even the cicadas paused their loud summer chorus as if to listen. He believed that the god of storms had, for that moment, remembered peace. The pines became central to this memory. In Japan, pine trees have long been symbols of endurance and renewal. They live through snow and salt air, their needles evergreen. Some believe that spirits find shelter among their branches, that their roots connect the land with the heavens. So when Susanoo found comfort there, it seemed fitting, as though the trees had been waiting for him. A traveler once said that when walking near that forest, he felt his heartbeat slow. The storm god's presence lingered not in fear, but in reassurance, as if even chaos could bend toward gentleness. He told his children, "Listen carefully. The pine does not shout, yet you hear it. It does not move swiftly, yet it sways without breaking. There is strength in quiet." Such sayings passed from parent to child, and so the memory of Susanoo resting beneath the trees became not a warning, but a lullaby. Of course, myths differ. In another version, Susanoo did not simply rest, but carved a flute from a fallen pine branch. He played a slow tune, low and breathy, carrying across the fields. The villagers, hearing it, said it was like wind softened into music. Some believed that was how the pine forests gained their voice. That every rustle you hear at night is part of that eternal song, a reminder that storms too can be soothed. I find myself wondering, and perhaps you will too, whether these stories arose because people needed comfort after real storms. Japan, after all, is a land where typhoons sweep the coasts, where seas rise suddenly, where thunder can rattle the mountains. 2. Imagine that even the storm god might lay down his fury and listen to the whispering trees gave people hope. It suggested that no matter how strong the tempest, there was always a chance for calm to follow. Picture it now. You walk a forest path at twilight. The air is still warm from the day, but shadows stretch long. You hear the breeze combing through the pines, steady, repetitive, soothing. You might notice the resin scent in the air, sharp yet grounding. Somewhere in the distance, a temple bell rings once, deep and lingering. With every step, the ground softens, covered in fallen needles, muffling sound so your own footsteps feel quieter. And though you know storms exist, tonight you are wrapped in their absence, Some storytellers said that Susanoo's exile was not only punishment, but a gift of renewal. For in leaving the heavens, he came to understand Earth more deeply. The villagers who tilled the soil, the fishermen who faced waves, the elders who lit lanterns at dusk. He walked among them, not always gentle, but more thoughtful than before. The pines, always listening, reminded him that even the fiercest heart can find a rhythm slower, steadier, kinder. And so the first part of our story closes with a simple scene. A storm god, once feared, sitting at the base of a tree while the wind moves through branches overhead. Nothing more dramatic than that. Yet in that stillness, an entire world breathes easier. And as you imagine it, perhaps you too feel the way the villagers must have felt. That safety can return, that anger can rest, that every storm, in time, leans toward silence. The years passed, and stories of Susanoo's quiet evening among the pines spread farther than the village where it began. Traders who carried saltfish to the mountains spoke of it by firelight. Farmers told it when rains threatened their crops. Some even wove the memory into songs sung by children on summer nights, where the words were simple, but the meaning deep, that storms could soften, that wild hearts could find rest. In one version, it is said that Susanoo built a small hut near the forest edge. The roof was thatched with reeds, the doorway marked by a rope of straw, the kind still seen today in Shinto shrines to signify sacred presence. He would come there not always, but sometimes, when weariness overcame him. There, villagers whispered, he would light a lantern. The glow, faint among the trees, seemed to ease the winds for miles. Those who saw it told themselves that if the storm god could sit in such stillness, so too could they. An artisan in that village once carved wooden charms in the shape of pine needles. He gave them to travelers, saying, "Carry this, and remember that even the wildest gale listens to the whisper of the trees." Some of those charms, people say, were passed down as heirlooms, small tokens of calm handed from hand to hand. They were reminders not only of Susanoo's story, but of how people themselves could endure, holding quiet strength within. When we listen to such tales, we might ask, was Susanoo truly transformed, or did people simply imagine him so in order to ease their fear? Myths do not give only one answer. In some accounts, Susanoo remained volatile, a figure of both blessing and destruction. Yet these softer stories survived because they offered balance. They suggested that even gods of thunder could learn gentleness, and if that was possible, then perhaps ordinary lives could also bend away from conflict and toward peace. On late summer nights, when the air was thick with cicadas, storytellers would gather beneath open eaves and tell the tale. They spoke slowly, letting the sound of insects fill the pauses. The children would listen wide-eyed, not frightened but soothed, for the idea of a god listening to trees was far less terrifying than one tearing through villages. And in those moments, the line between myth and lullaby blurred. The storm god became not only a figure of awe, but also of reassurance, one who might walk unseen among them, watching not to punish but to protect. Imagine sitting there, among those listeners. The sky is dark yet gentle, a handful of stars showing between drifting clouds. A faint breeze brushes your cheek. You can smell rice fields damp with water, hear frogs in the distance. The storyteller's voice is calm, measured, rising and falling like the sway of the trees. And though you know the world holds tempests, tonight you rest in the promise that they too must quiet. There is another thread in Susanoo's story, one that binds his storm to renewal. In myth, after his exile, Susanoo is said to have wandered until he reached the land of Izumo, where he encountered a family in distress. Their daughter, Kushinada Hime, was to be sacrificed to a fearsome serpent with 8 heads. Yet in this version told by the villagers near the pines, the tale is softened. They spoke not of terror or blood, but of a god who used cleverness to bring peace. Susanoo, they said, lulled the serpent with sake, a drink brewed slowly from rice. And when the danger passed, he built a home with Kushanada Haim. The pines, villagers whispered, were witnesses to this change. They bent gently in the wind, as though nodding approval. Thus, storms and renewal, chaos and homecoming, were bound together. It was said that whenever Susanoo and Kushanada walked beneath the trees, the winds calmed, even if clouds had gathered. Some believed this was why. Shrines to Susanoo were often surrounded by groves of pine and cedar. The trees marked places where storms gave way to peace. Scholars much later asked whether these associations reflected something deeper. Perhaps that in Shinto belief, every force of nature carried both danger and blessing. Storms could destroy, but they also brought rain for crops. Winds could uproot, yet they also carried seeds. To tell of Susanoo finding calm among pines was not to deny his wildness, but to show the full circle. Fury balanced by renewal, sound balanced by silence. And so the myth lingered, always reminding listeners that the world itself holds both. One elder, when asked why she told the story to her grandchildren, smiled and said, "Because when they hear thunder, I want them to remember the forest, not just the storm. I want them to close their eyes and hear the pine needles singing." In that answer lies the heart of the tale. It was never only about gods, but about people finding ways to hold courage when skies darkened. And so this second part of our story drifts to its own rest. The storm god has walked farther, found companionship, even glimpsed home. The villagers have kept his memory not in fear, but in calm ritual. And we, as listeners across time, find ourselves breathing easier, as though the whisper of pines has reached us too, carrying assurance that every gale will, at last, turn into a breeze. The story of the whispering pines did not stop at the village. It traveled with sailors along the coast, with pilgrims on mountain roads, and with artisans who shaped roof tiles like curling clouds. People would pause at wayside shrines, bow once, and place a green sprig beneath a smooth stone. Some called this a thanks to Susanoo for letting storms pass more gently. Others said it was a promise to themselves, to keep tempers soft and words slow, like wind combing needles at dusk. On a late autumn evening, a healer entered the pines. She carried a wooden box of herbs and a cloth lamp. All week she had tended fevers and felt the quiet ache that care can leave behind. She stood in the hush, listened to the needles breathing, and began to hum. In one telling, those on the path heard her melody and could not say if the sound rose from her lips or from the trees. She tied a small charm of twisted straw to a low bough and went home a little lighter. A traveler came after the first frost. He had argued with his brother and wished to make amends but did not yet know how. He sat where old roots lifted the earth in gentle waves. In the soft dark he remembered the artisan saying, "The pine does not shout." So he composed a letter in his mind and practiced the first lines until they felt true. When he returned to the village, he cooked rice, carried it to his brother's door, and spoke the words he had rehearsed beneath the trees. The two men ate in easy silence that felt like relief. Perhaps this is why, even now, people remember Susanoo not only as a storm god, but as a guardian of thresholds, the places where change begins. In Shinto practice, a rope with paper streamers marks a boundary between everyday space and sacred ground. Pines often stand near those edges, steady through snow, heat, and salt air. To pass them is to step, for a moment, into a room of listening. Scholars note that pines long signified longevity and renewal. Listeners add another thread. They sound like breath. There are star stories as well. Fishermen teach their children to read the sky while drifting just offshore. A certain cluster looks, they say, like a hand adjusting a sail, another like a cup of sake raised to the moon. Whether or not they appear in charts, they live in memory. A work song speaks of Susanoo on a headland with a pine flute, guiding boats by sound when fog is thick. If you have heard wind in hollow wood, You know how music and weather can become one calm voice carrying home. One winter, a young woodworker visited the forest to choose boards for a cradle. He worked by day and studied by night, learning the joints that need no nails. He laid his hand on a fallen trunk and felt firmness even in the cold. He thanked the tree for what it would become. When the cradle was finished, he carved a tiny pine on the headboard. His daughter slept there through early storms, soothed by the rhythm of rain on the eaves. Years later, he kept the cradle, not as furniture, but as a promise of return. As the tale moves toward rest, we return to Susanoo and Kushinada walking beneath the trees. Their house is modest. A stream runs behind it, and stones hold back the bank, so water murmurs, not roars. They hang wind chimes that speak only when breezes are kind. People ask, how do we face what we fear? How do we quiet our own storms? In one version, Susanoo smiles and points to the pines. He says that listening is not weakness, but craft. He says that a steady breath can carry the heaviest weather. Our curiosity can end gently here. The symbols meet: storm and renewal, rope and threshold, pine and longevity, flute and breath. Even the serpent story, softened in village telling, becomes a lesson about guiding danger into sleep rather than feeding it with rage. The custom of placing a sprig under a stone may be no ancient decree, only a habit, yet it carries meaning, a small weight to steady what might drift. When we honor a place with one quiet act, we are changed. And when enough people repeat it, it becomes tradition. So, if you are lying awake tonight, think of the pine forest under the moon. Think of the healer humming, the brothers sharing rice, the woodworker's cradle. Imagine the air bright, with grains of resin, the ground springy beneath the needles, the distant sea turning silver. Picture Susanoo at rest, the storm inside him untied like a rope gently loosened. Imagine the wind moving through branches like a harp, slow and patient, notes dissolving into silence. Breathe in, breathe out, and let the hush of the grove become your room. You are safe here, held by night and story. Thank you for listening to this bedtime mythology story, a relaxing story from Japanese folklore about Susanoo, the whispering pines, and the way nature teaches peace. If you enjoyed this gentle tale and would like more soothing legends, sleep meditations, and calm storytelling, remember to subscribe, leave a kind comment, and share with someone who needs rest. May the wind in the pines keep your dreams safe. May the morning meet you kindly, and may you always find your way home. Good night.